Hello, church. Let's get back into Proverbs, and we're going to start a new chapter, chapter 6. We have made our way finally through chapter 5, and of course, the first 4 chapters that precede chapter 5. And we are now going to dig into chapter 6. So if you can, get your Bibles out, get it handy, and we're going to read the first 5 verses of Proverbs chapter 6 and make a few remarks on them that I hope will be a help to you. Proverbs chapter 6, verse number 1. Solomon writes these words. He's speaking again to his son when he says, "My son, if thou be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. Thou art taken with the words of thy mouth." He says, "Do this now, my son, and deliver thyself, when thou art come into the hand of thy friend. Go, humble thyself, and make sure thy friend. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids." Verse 5, "Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler." Now, without question, romance is the dominating topic in the book of Proverbs. Given Solomon's extensive experience with it, given the impact romance can have on young people, it makes sense that Solomon addresses it as often as he does, and we'll see it again more throughout the book of Proverbs as we go through this series in the Proverbs. And romance, of all the things that can influence a young person's life and what direction they go into life at that young age, that young formable age, romance has got to be the most influential. A young person can pick a man or a woman, a boy or a girl to invest in, and that relationship, their emotions towards that relationship, the power that that person in that relationship has over an individual, that will dictate really the direction a person goes. A young person can get into a good romantic relationship at a young age and really help them. I know young people who, had they not chosen the spouse that they did, they probably wouldn't be walking the path that they're walking. And then there are other young people who choose the wrong boyfriend, the wrong girlfriend, the wrong spouse, the wrong mate, and they make terrible decisions, and the rest of their life is impacted by that. So romance, probably the most influential factor outside of a person's walk with God when it comes to what will happen for the rest of your life. Well, second to romance, or at least close in the top few topics that Solomon addresses, is money. Solomon's going to address money often throughout the book of Proverbs, and it makes sense because money is very influential. Money can really have a big impact on what happens to a young person's life, both in their pursuit of it, their decisions of it, and as Solomon had a gravitational pull towards romance, and he had extensive experience with all of the ladies in his life, you could say the same was true for money. Not that there was any obvious gravitational pull where he was in love with money, because he wasn't, but he had extensive experience with it. He was the wealthiest of the kings of Israel, had tons of silver, tons of gold. So he had a lot of experience with romance, and he spoke a lot about it. A lot of experience with finances, with money, with gold and silver, and so we'll find he will be speaking a lot about it. And these two issues, romance and money, are big issues for young people. Bad romantic decisions can steer a young person in the wrong direction. Bad financial decisions at a young age can really ruin the rest of a young person's life. And on the same side, good romantic decisions can help change a person's life for the good. Good financial decisions can help change the life and direction of a young person. Now, when it comes to finances, Solomon doesn't address just those key principles when it comes to financial integrity, such as saving and spending, how to do that. He will address that throughout the book. But in this chapter, what he starts with is some sound counsel pertaining to becoming surety for someone else. Surety is mentioned 5 times in the book of Proverbs. This is the first. Surety is not something we use in our financial conversations today, but it is something we implement in our financial practices today, in particular in our lending institutions. And so you may not be familiar with what surety is or with what it means, but if you look at the passage, there's enough information just in this passage that will give you an idea of what surety is. In fact, in verse number 1, if you look at it again, Solomon says, "My son, if thou be surety for thy friend, Then he says, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger. So often the Bible does this. Often there's a statement or a phrase or a word, a comma, then a statement, phrase, or word that is not adding to the description or conversation. It's essentially equivalating two phrases, equating two words. It's helping those of us who are reading this book thousands of years later to understand the terminology of the day. Because what was spoken thousands of years ago, especially in a whole different region of the world, is not typically what you're going to say in this region at this point in history. So the Bible has already embedded into itself this self-defining element, this character. And so when Solomon says, if you've become surety for thy friend, comma, if you have stricken your hand with a stranger, he's defining what surety is for those of us who don't use that vocabulary and language anymore. So he says, if you have stricken your hand with a stranger, if you are shaking hands with a stranger, if you're shaking hands to essentially close a deal. We're talking finances. We're talking some type of legally binding financial arrangement with somebody that you don't know, a lending officer, a bank, a business owner. And so you should be getting an idea of what you're involved with. But if you're still not sure what surety is, you can run to the dictionary and it will tell you a number of definitions of what it is, and one of them will apply to this. Or you can get a concordance and just look up surety. And in the Bible, you will see this show up through different portions of Scripture. And the Bible will define itself. A dictionary is very handy. A dictionary will help you with understanding definitions in the Bible, but a concordance is actually a better tool, because a concordance will give you that word in the same book, and so the same author using the same word in different places will give you the pieces to draw conclusions about things you may not be familiar with. And if you took a concordance and looked up the word surety, you'd find yourself in the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, you have this story that most of us should know. It's about Jacob, whose name would be turned to Israel. Israel would have 12 sons, one of whom was Joseph, one of whom was Benjamin, one of whom was Judah, and there are others. But in Genesis chapter 43, there's a famine going on throughout the area. And in Canaan would be Jacob, or Israel, and his family, a very large family. There are grandchildren and great-grandchildren there, and they're going hungry. Well, in Egypt, there's plenty of grain, because for the past 7 years, or I should say for the past few years, the prince of Egypt, whom we know to be Joseph, given a dream about the famine, has been saving all the grain to be able to sustain the Egyptians, and, as God would know, to spare and save the Israelites during the famine. So anyways, Jacob sends his sons down to Egypt. They bring back the grain so that the family is sustained during this famine. But while they're there, Joseph, whom they don't know is Joseph, their brother, asks about if they have any other siblings. And they say, yeah, we have a younger brother. He's back at home. Well, Joseph knows this is his younger brother, Benjamin. Benjamin and Joseph are the two sons of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, who is no longer alive. And so Joseph tells his brothers, whom they don't know that they're his brothers, he says, if you're going to come back for any grain, don't come back unless you bring your youngest brother with you. He wanted to see his younger brother. So the brothers go back to Jacob and say, Jacob, Dad, we can't go back to get any grain unless you send Benjamin. And Jacob says, no way, Jose, I'm not sending my son. I already lost his brother. I already lost the son of my beloved Rachel. I'm not going to lose Benjamin, and so you're not taking him back. And so no one talks about it for a while. Well, eventually the grain gets very low. And Jacob knows they need to eat. All the grown sons and their families are getting hungry. And so there's a conversation about going back into Egypt to get more grain. Well, Judah says, Dad, we told you, the prince of Egypt, he's not letting us back in. He's not going to sell us any grain unless we bring our younger brother. And so there's this family feud about why they even brought him up, and look what you've done to me now. But through the course of that conversation, Judah will say something to his father that will help us understand what the word surety means. And in Genesis 43, verse number 8, Judah pleads with his father to let Benjamin go with him. And he says this, he says, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou and also our little ones. He then says this, I, Judah, your son, will be surety for him. So there's that word surety. It's not a word we use in that conversation or in any conversations, truthfully, today. But what he would say next would define what it means to be surety for someone. He says, of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. So taking Proverbs chapter 6 and what is said about surety in that first verse, and then taking Genesis 43 and what Judah says about Benjamin being surety for him, we can conclude before we even look at a dictionary, before digging into the financial terminology of both Scripture and perhaps society, we can conclude that being surety for somebody is being responsible for their obligations, being responsible for someone if they can't meet their financial expectations. Or in Judah's case, if I don't bring Benjamin back, hold me accountable. Make me responsible for the circumstances. So surety is becoming responsible for someone in the event of their misfortune or failure. Surety in Scripture is a legally binding guarantee to pay for someone else's debts or responsibilities. In modern terminology, in our day and age, becoming surety for thy friend is becoming someone's co-signer. Co-signing is essentially what Solomon is discussing with his son and readers in chapter 6. It is making a deal with a financial institution or a business to pay your friends financial obligations if they fail to do so. That's why Solomon says, if you've stricken your hand with a stranger, if you've made a deal, if you've promised to pay what your friend cannot pay in the event that they're unable or unwilling to do that, you're collateral, you're a guarantee. Financial institutions today, for people who have weak credit or not enough credit or bad credit, will often require a co-signer, meaning if the primary borrower does not pay, they know that they can go to somebody else and recover their funds, basically making that person pay for the original borrower's promises to pay back what they're borrowing. That is co-signing. That is becoming surety for thy friend. You know, the wise author of Proverbs, whom we know to be Solomon, he understood that life's success is more about having a sound theological understanding, although that's priority number one. Understanding God, understanding true principles pertaining to God in Scripture, that's number one, without question. But he understood that there's more to life and success than just having a sound theological understanding. He says you've got to have a sound financial understanding. You can know everything there is to know about God, but if you make poor financial decisions, well, you could ruin your life. The same is true for romance. You can know everything there is to know about God, but make bad romantic decisions, and that could ruin your life. Having a bad understanding of God, having a bad understanding of romance, having a bad understanding of finances, all of which can still ruin your life. And so he's taking the time to help his readers, his children, understand the importance of sound financial practices. In this case, a lack of understanding about finances could result in thousands of dollars becoming your instantaneous debt and therefore a burden to your life, a burden to your future if you co-sign for a friend who fails to pay because of a lack of financial character. Such a situation could severely impact your life and your future. And so Solomon's addressing these financial matters here in chapter 6. In these first 5 verses of Proverbs 6, we learn 3 simple life truths. Number 1, good intentions don't always end up in good decisions. Solomon, as he talks about co-paying, or co-signing rather, he's not talking about going out and finding some stranger on the streets and being willing to sign off on some loan. He's not talking about going and finding an enemy and becoming their co-signer. He's talking specifically about a friend. In verse 1, he says, if you've become surety for thy friend. So this would speak to a natural desire to help your friend. Anytime a friend is in financial need and a loan is required, and you are aware of that, well, there's a natural desire to help your friend because you love your friend. If your friend needs a car and they don't have the money to get a car, they need a loan to get a car, but their credit's weak or bad, and the institution lending them money to get a car requires a signature of somebody else to be on that documentation, well, naturally, you're going to feel obligated to help them in some way because you want your friend to be able to have a car, to get to work, and to live a normal life. So there are good intentions in this passage because you're dealing with co-signing for a friend. But Solomon would move on quickly in verse number 2 to describe co-signing, becoming surety for thy friend, as a snare. He says in verse number 2, if you do that, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Surely you would want to help a friend in need financially, but is this a good idea? A good intention to help doesn't always equate to a good decision. Solomon denounces the decision to co-sign and infers it to be a foolish decision. In this case, as we speak specifically about co-signing, understand that you're co-signing on a loan of a friend is legally binding yourself for the length of that loan, for the amount of that loan, to the character of your friend for the length of that loan. What you're doing, if you put your signature on there and you shake the hand of that institution, you are essentially binding yourself legally, not just to the character of your friend, but to the abilities and the health of your friend for the length of that loan, for the full amount of that loan. It's foolish. Unless you have lots of money sitting aside. If you have thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars sitting around and you're not sure what to do with it, well, maybe it makes sense for you to be a help to your friend, but most of us don't have that. Most of us have financial obligations, responsibilities of our own. We have priorities with our families and, of course, to our God first and foremost. Despite the ability of your friend on the day the loan is signed, no one can tell what his abilities will be on the days following the loan is signed. You say, well, my friend's got great Christian character. My friend has great financial character. Well, that may be true now. It may be true even on the day that you sign your name to that loan, assuming you'll never have to be a part of that loan. But no one can tell what will happen to your friend tomorrow. No one can tell what will happen to the character, to the morality of your friend tomorrow. Will they get involved in some addictive substance that will take money, that will take their job? Will they get involved with some addictive hobby? You just don't know. And so you're signing yourself, committing yourself to a financial obligation pertaining to the future of somebody else that you have no control over. It's not wise. It's not wise. Good intentions don't always end in good decisions. And this is true for financial decisions, but it's also true for every other good intention. Good romantic intentions don't always end up in good decisions. A lot of people have good intentions to get close to somebody in a godly manner. They have a lady or a guy that they like, and they pursue that relationship with good intentions to do so in a godly way and in such a way that puts God first. But sadly, they find themselves close to that person in an ungodly way, in a sexually impure way, or in a carnal way. A lot of spouses, married people, have good intentions to help a friend in need, to help somebody in need. But sadly, over time, those good intentions don't transfer to good decisions, and they get emotionally invested with the person they were trying to help for good reasons and end up leaving their spouse for that person. Understand this, intentions don't define our lives. Decisions do. You may have great intentions at the beginning, but bad decisions often follow good intentions, and those bad decisions can ruin our lives. We need to temper and steer our good intentions with wisdom and prudence. There's a second thing that we learn in this passage, and that is this: good friendships don't always end in good relationships. Good intentions don't always end up in good decisions, and good friendships don't always end up in good relationships. In verse number 3, Solomon speaks very clearly to his son and instructs him to get out of that legal responsibility in order to, quote, make sure thy friend. That's in verse number 3. What he is saying in these next few verses is essentially that relationships are more important than riches. friendships are more important than financial relationships and what you can do financially. Co-signing for a friend is a dangerous thing to do, both financially and also from a relationship standpoint. Understand that if a friend fails to meet his or her financial obligation, and that puts all of the financial burden on the friend who co-signed, it's almost impossible for that friendship to be preserved through that. Even if it's preserved, it will be tainted. It will be stained without question. When a friend co-signs for another friend, that friendship is going to endure stress. It's inheriting a risk that down the road, that person doesn't pay their loan and then shifts all that burden to a friend. That will damage, if not destroy, a friendship. But even just the stress of having that loan, whether it's out for a year or 3 years or 5 years or 7 years or 10 or more years, for the length of that loan, the friendship's going to endure some stress. What's going to happen is the friend who co-signed for the borrower, that friend is invested now into its friend's financial lifestyle. And so the co-signer is going to be more apt to give advice to the borrower about how they should operate financially. This will be unwanted advice, by the way. And what will happen is the co-signer will critique the decisions and the financial decisions of the borrower and think, oh boy, why are they buying that house? Or why are they buying this car? They have this loan to pay, because if they don't pay that loan, I'm going to be stuck with it. And so the co-signer will experience a level of critique, a level of input, a level of investment into their friend's life that probably is going to be unwanted. Money, perhaps more than anything in our cursed world, money negatively impacts relationships. It destroys marriages. How many divorces are responsible because of money? Churches, businesses, friends, brothers, sisters, money gets in so easily. Lots of businesses run by brothers, for example, often turn brothers into enemies. Why? Because of money matters. Churches split. Why? Because of budgetary decisions or because of input as to why this was spent or why that was spent. Again, marriages fail. Friendships fail. When you co-sign on a loan with a friend, you are putting that friendship at risk. And it may be a strong friendship on the day you sign that loan, but that friendship doesn't always end up as a good relationship, because money has a way of negatively impacting us. It has a way of getting into our emotions and getting us to view things. Think about the co-signing friend. Is that co-signing friend not going to have higher expectations of their borrowing friend throughout life? Because after all, I was willing to put my name on your life. I was willing to put my name on that document. I'm pledging to pay that $5,000 or $10,000 if you don't. There's a level of expectation now from the co-signer that the borrower should reciprocate that type of friendship. Not necessarily in co-signing, but you should be there for me because I was there for you. And those expectations are always disappointed because people are people. People move on from friendships. What if that friendship isn't as close as it once was? Well, that co-signer is going to feel used. And so there can be lots of problems. Solomon is telling him to make sure thy friend. That means to make secure thy friend. He's saying, go humble yourself and secure your friendship. Look at your friendship in a bigger way than you look at that loan. You want to help your friend by co-signing, but that's a risky thing to the friendship, and you're actually jeopardizing the friendship. So you may be a help to them today by co-signing, but you may lose your friendship in the process. Place friendship over finances. He suggests to his son to do whatever is necessary, including paying the loan off, or going and securing another loan on an independent scale where the relationship won't be hampered. As a general rule, he's saying, get money out of your friendship. Don't enter into these arrangements and agreements that can jeopardize your friendship. So do whatever you have to do to secure your friendship and get out of the arrangement that you made. It will require humility, because it will be embarrassing to acknowledge you did something you shouldn't do, but your friendship is worth that. Your friendship is worth getting out of this arrangement. Good friendships don't always end in good relationships when good intentions don't transfer to good decisions. We need to value our friendships beyond the present day and make decisions that take the future day into account. A little disappointment in the heart of your friend today, because they will be disappointed if you don't co-sign for them. But a little disappointment today in the heart of your friend is worth sparing you both from heartbreak down the road. Number 3, we learn in these few verses that good observations don't always end in good conversations. Number 1, good intentions don't always end up in good decisions. Number 2, good friendships don't always end up in good relationships. And number 3, good observations don't always end up in good conversations. What I mean by that, in verse number 3, as well as through verses 4 and 5, Solomon adds some urgency to his counsel. He knows that most of us, when we make unwise decisions, most of us, when we make foolish decisions, even with good intentions, we have a time of regret, a time of reflection where we think and we say, I'm not sure I should have done that. That was kind of a hasty decision, or that was an emotionally charged decision, or I, in the moment, thought it was a good idea, but now that I think about it, that probably isn't a good idea. And so in that moment, we often have a time of reconsideration. And Solomon knows furthermore that not only do we often rethink and regret some of the decisions we make, but we also have a tendency to avoid talking about them. We have this instinct nature to say, I made a bad decision, but it's not as bad as the conversation that I would have if I went to my friend and say, hey, friend, it was a bad idea to co-sign on your loan. But Solomon is saying you've got to humble yourself. You've got to humble yourself, tell yourself you made a bad decision, and be willing to go before your friend and ask for their apologies that you made a bad decision for their friendship, and ask to get out of that loan obligation somehow, some way, whatever it takes. And Solomon goes on to say in verse 4, you have to be urgent about this. He says, don't sleep. Don't sleep on it. Don't think about it for days on end and weeks on end and months on end. He says you've got to have the type of urgency that a deer has when it's escaping the hunter. You have to have the type of urgency that a bird has when it's escaping the fowler. Don't sleep. Don't wait on it. You've got to go talk now. Solomon understood the longer we wait to implement our good observations in having good conversations for the sake of a long-term friendship, he says it's most likely that you'll never talk about it. This is human nature. The longer we put things off because we feel it's too uncomfortable, what we begin to do is then tell ourselves, reassure ourselves that everything will be fine. The longer we go without having that conversation, we then convince ourselves that, don't worry, he'll pay the bills, she'll pay the loan, we'll never have to deal with it, and we'll be happily ever after, and I'll be a good friend. Well, that's a mistake, because the risk over the length of that loan in both the stress to that friendship and ultimately the potential for your friend to not pay their loan is what could destroy the friendship. And it's worth the uncomfortable conversation. It's worth the humility in saying I shouldn't have done that. It's worth the sticky conversation. The longer we wait to have that conversation, the less likely we'll ever have it. And that's going to be a problem. Risky decisions need to become reversed decisions for the sake of our long-term friendships. Risky decisions need to be reversed in haste for the sake of our friendships. And again, this doesn't apply just to financial decisions. It should apply to spiritual decisions. It should apply to romantic decisions. It should apply to career decisions. It should apply to parental decisions. If you realize after saying something or doing something or committing to something that you shouldn't have done that, well, don't sit on that for days on end and weeks on end. Don't even give sleep to it. If you know, and the Spirit of God has shown you that you shouldn't have said that or done that, well, then reverse that immediately. Take that observation you had internally, turn it into a conversation externally with your friend, with your spouse, with your child, and make things right, because the longer you go, the less likely you will ever have that conversation. For example, if you realize you made a decision that is risky or potentially detrimental to your relationship with God or with men, turn that observation into a conversation. The longer you wait to break up with that boyfriend, The longer you wait to break up with that girlfriend that you know is not drawing you close to God but drawing you away from God, the more likely you'll never have that conversation, and you will be stuck in that relationship that you may see as potentially good now, but long term it's going to ruin your relationship with God or family or friends or somebody else. The longer you wait to get out of that job that you know is detrimental to your marriage, the more likely your long-term relationship with your spouse will be in jeopardy. The longer you wait to make that decision, reverse that decision to come back to the church that God has for you, the less likely you'll ever make that decision, and you'll put your long-term relationship with God and his people in jeopardy. Proverbs 6, 1 through 5. It's about surety. Surety. An opportunity to realize that good intentions don't always end in good decisions. An opportunity to realize that good friendships don't always end in good relationships. An opportunity to realize that good observations don't always end in good conversations. As a summary, a conclusion of these first 5 verses, I would say this: think beyond today and make sound decisions that no one will live to regret, including and especially the friend whom you love so dearly. God bless you.